Hey, welcome back to the shop. Today we are starting a three-part series in regards to HVAC. The first part of the series, I'm going to talk about the major components for the HVAC system and the flow of the HVAC system. This will tie into the second part of the series where we will talk about diagnosing and troubleshooting for the HVAC system. In the third part, we'll go into system recovery and cleaning, as well as anything that entails. So getting into the first part, we're going to be talking about the major components. So the first component we're going to start with is the compressor. Now the compressor is responsible for the flow of the refrigerant vapor throughout the system. This flow is usually coming out of the compressor at approximately 220 psi. So that brings it to about 170 degrees boiling point approximate. Now, as I said, this is a high pressure vaporized refrigerant that's coming out of the compressor. And as I said, the compressor is responsible for flow, not the actual pressure, but for flow. It assists in the pressurizing of the lines. Now, from the compressor, the refrigerant will move through the line coming out, and we're going to go into our next component, which is going to be the condenser. So the condenser, in order to remove any BTUs or heat, and then converts the vapor into a liquid. So just as, let's say, a pot is boiling. Well, let's show this here. We have a boiling pot. The water vapor collects onto the lid and condenses and forms back into liquid. So as it's boiling, it comes off as a gas. It goes from liquid to gas, condenses back into liquid. So basically a concentration of the vapor coming together, and a reduction in temperature will put that back into a liquid. That's the same thing as a condenser in your vehicle. There's basically it comes in as a high pressure superheated vapor. The temperature, of course, is over boiling point. So as that airflow passes through the system, that brings the temperature down to what's called a saturation point. Basically, the amount of vapor that has collected and the temperature will cause it to become a liquid. So as that liquid begins to move through the system, because of course the condenser is creating that flow, it's pushing through the system, the liquid coming out will be a pure liquid. There should be no vapor, and this liquid will basically be subcooled liquid. It'll be a high pressure subcooled liquid, not high enough to boil it or turn it back into a gas, but it'll be a high pressure subcooled liquid. At that point, the liquid will then go into the receiver dryer. This receiver dryer is pretty much like a storage tank and a filter all in one. The liquid will pass through a desiccant filter that will allow any moisture that was coming from the air in the system, any kind of water, anything, it will basically, that desiccant filter will absorb that. After it passes through the filter, it'll go into a collection point where there's a pickup tube that will then collect the liquid. Now, only the liquid refrigerant will pass through the pickup tube. But the first part of the receiver is pretty much a storage tank. So once it's passed through the desiccant filter, is picked up by the storage tube. This unit also would contain usually a sight glass, so that you can look for the discoloration as far as cloudiness or anything like that might affect it. Usually cloudiness will be moisture that has gotten in, that has gotten past the desiccant filter, which means your desiccant filter probably needs changed. The receiver dryer is the #1 most maintained item. because of the desiccant filter and having to change it out. So it's the common part to be replaced. And some of the filters will have a moisture indicator as well, as far as showing that moisture is present in your refrigerant system. Now from there, the refrigerant, once picked up by the tube, is going through. You're still dealing with a high pressure supercooled liquid. So it'll go into the next component, which will be your valve. So that will either be an orifice tube, as pictured here, or this will be a H-block style valve, or a THX, thermal expansion valve. Now, as I said, it's coming in as a high pressure supercooled liquid. When it's moving through the valve, basically there's a restriction in the flow in this valve. This is what assists the second part of creating the pressure in this part of the system. You have the condenser pushing, creating flow, and you have the valve on the other end giving a restriction of flow. Now once the liquid goes through the valve, it goes into, basically, as the valve says, an expansion chamber, so it'll expand. Now the expansion of this liquid basically will allow the depressurization of the liquid, so this will now turn into a low pressure, kind of a low pressure heated vapor because of the pressure coming out. Now, sorry, it'll be actually low pressure subcooled. Sorry, not low pressure heated. It'll be a low pressure subcooled liquid that'll be coming out. Now, when it moves into this low pressure, now this side of the system, the pressure is normally approximately 20 to 30 psi. In that regards, it may contain some gas, some vapor. This is referred to as flash gas. That may get passed, but it may contain some flash gas. Again, passing through the THV, there is some BTUs, British thermal units, heat basically that will be around, that will cause boils. This is normal on a small scale. Anything larger means you're getting too much pressure into your low pressure side, and that basically is something we'll talk about in the troubleshooting and diagnosing. Basically, the line out of the TXV valve will basically be insulated, because we're talking about a colder temperature, so we want to create that insulation. We don't want to lose any of that temperature. From the TXV valve, we're going to move on. It's then going to go into the evaporator. Now the evaporator is usually located inside the cab of your vehicle. This is what the airflow passes over when delivered into your cab air. So that cold air that you're feeling passes through this. In the evaporator, the liquid will come in at a low pressure subcooled liquid. So it's moving into the evaporator as low pressure subcooled liquid. It uses, like I said, the cab air to absorb more of the heat coming out. This, again, changing the temperature. As it changes the temperature, now this vapor is not like regular water. We understand that boiling water to turn it from a liquid to a gas happens at a certain temperature. The vapor in this, or the refrigerant in this system, does the same thing as water, but it does it at a different temperature. So it does it a little bit cooler. So when it's warm, it's in a gas state. As it begins to cool off, it hits that point where it becomes liquid. As it moves through the evaporator as a liquid, by the time it hits the center, again getting to a point where it becomes back, or starts to convert back into a gas. So the refrigerant temperature will rise to its boiling temperature, which is a low temperature. So once that subcooled reaches that saturated point again, it'll start to boil. Usually, at around the middle of the, or it'll begin to boil, or usually around the middle of the unit. The temperature will hold throughout the evaporator. So as it moves through the evaporator and comes out, that's when you're going to have your low pressure heated vapor, and from there it will pass the thermal bulb. Now the thermal bulb will not be in all systems. Usually it's tied in with a thermal expansion valve. Now the thermal bulb that I have pictured here is basically a standalone self-contained unit. Basically, if it goes bad, you have to replace the whole unit. It contains refrigerant, but as I said, it's self-contained. So it will basically measure the temperature and uses the coolant to then transfer movement into the thermal expansion valve to make the valve open and close based on the temperature to allow more or less of the fluid coming through. Now after it moves past that, it goes right back to the condenser. So now you have it moving to, the compressor. You now have it moving to the compressor, coming in as a low pressure vapor, low pressure cooled vapor coming in. So there you have the complete flow of the unit. So on the high side, you have a pressure of about 220 psi, give or take, depending on the system that you have. And on the low side, you have a pressure of about 20 to 30 psi. So this information you're going to take with you into your troubleshooting and any problem solving that you may have. So that's going to wrap up this end of it. In the next episode, as I said, we're going to go into troubleshooting, and the episode after that will go into refrigerant collection and cleaning the system. So after you've troubleshoot, what to do after that. Alright, thanks for joining me.